Welcome to my channel. The decline of the Ottoman Empire, 1566 to 1807. Internal problems. The Ottoman Empire reached its height during the rule of Suleiman I the Magnificent, but signals of weakness heralded the start of a slow but sure decline. The declining skill and power of the sultans themselves was a significant contributor to the collapse. Suleiman withdrew farther from public life to focus on the pleasures of his harem after growing weary of the campaigns and taxing administrative tasks. The position of Grand Vizier was created to take his place, and it was developed to become the second highest-ranking position in terms of power and wealth after the Sultan. The Grand Vizier was able to perform the Sultan's duties in his place, but he was unable to assume the role of the empire's center of loyalty for the various classes and factions. The central government's capacity to impose its will was diminished as a result of the division of political loyalty and centralized control. The triumph of the devshir made the Turkish nobility, which lost nearly all of its influence and status in the capital and relocated to its former strongholds in southeast Europe and Anatolia, was also vanquished by the devshirme in the middle of the 16th century. Due to the devshirme's seizure and conversion of many of the timurs formerly assigned to the notables to support the Sipahi cavalry into great estates, which effectively became private property, depriving the state of both their services and the income they could have generated if they had been converted into tax farms. The Janissaries and their allied artillery corps replaced the Sipahis as the most significant military units in the Ottoman army. However, the Sipahis did not completely vanish. Corruption and nepotism. The devshirme took control of the sultans once they lost their ability to direct it by pitting it against the Turkish notables, and instead of using the government for the advantage of a sultan or his empire, it began to use it for its own purposes. As a result, corruption and nepotism spread to all administrative levels. The devshirme class also disintegrated into numerous factions and parties after the notables' challenge was eliminated, each of which worked for its own interests by endorsing the candidacy of a particular imperial prince and forming strong alliances with related palace factions headed by the mothers, sisters, and wives of each prince. Absence of the tools created by their forebears to that goal, they created new ones. Selim II, often known as the Sot, or the Blonde, reigned from 1566 to 1974, and Murad III, who reigned from 1574 to 95, both rose to power by manipulating the various factions and undermining the Grand Vizier's position, which served as the primary administrative tool for factional and party dominance in the faltering Ottoman Empire. Following the overthrow of Mehmed Sokollu, served 1565 to 79, the Grand Viziers lost their hegemonic position. Power passed first into the harem women's hands during the Sultanate of the Women, 1570–78, and then into the hands of the top Janissary officers, the Agas, who took control from 1578. Economic difficulties. Given these circumstances, it was inevitable that the Ottoman administration would be unable to address the escalating issues that the empire faced in the 16th and 17th centuries. When the Dutch and British entirely shut down the previous international trade routes through the Middle East in the late 16th century, economic challenges started to emerge. All those relying on salaries were underpaid, which led to more thievery, excessive taxation, and corruption. Timurs and tax farms were no longer seen as long-term investments whose success needed to be preserved to provide for the future, but rather as money streams to be exploited as quickly as possible by their owners. They were also able to convert those holdings into private property, either as life holdings, malakane, or religious endowments, vakif, without any further duties to the government, thanks to political power and corruption. Social unrest. Large population expansion during the 16th and 17th centuries, which was a result of the overall population increase that took place in much of Europe at that time, made such conditions worse. Because of the chaotic political and economic situation, there was not only insufficient subsistence to satisfy the requirements of the growing population, but it actually decreased. Disorder developed as social distress grew. As the central government weakened, peasant rebel groups were able to seize control of significant portions of the empire, keeping all the remaining tax revenues for themselves and frequently interrupting the regular food supplies to the cities and the Ottoman army still manning the borders. In such circumstances, the army disintegrated, and the majority of salaried jobs in the Janissary and other corps merely served as additional cash streams for their holders without requiring them to render any military duties in return. External relations. Despite these challenges, for long of the 17th century, only the most astute Ottoman and outside observers could see the internal Ottoman weakness. The Ottoman army was still feared by the majority of Europeans, as it had been for 2 centuries. Despite being less effective, it was nevertheless powerful enough to prevent the provincial rebels from seizing total power and even to make a few more notable conquests in both the east and the west. The empire experienced defeats for the first time, but it still had enough reserve power to recover when necessary and avoid losing any crucial pieces of the empire. Despite the political upheavals at the time, the Ottomans occasionally launched fresh campaigns. The Ottoman positions north of the Black Sea and in the Caucasus Range came under threat when the rising Principality of Moscow conquered the final Mongol states in Central Asia and reached the Caspian Sea. Murad III took advantage of this situation to take control of the northern Caucasus and to seize the long-desired Azerbaijan. Reform efforts Sultans Osman II, 1618-22, and Murad IV, 1623-40, as well as the renowned Köprülü Grand Vizier dynasty who served under Mehmed IV, 1648-87, Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, 1656-61, and Köprülü Fazıl Ahmed Pasha, 1661-76, were responsible for the Ottoman reforms that were implemented during the 17th century. Shah Abzai, who not only restored Iranian power but also conquered Iraq, 1624, and threatened to take over the entire Ottoman Empire, put an end to the chaos in Iran. Despite Murad IV's success in retaking Iraq, 1638, Iran continued to pose a serious danger. Finally, a large Venetian naval assault on Istanbul occurred during the protracted war with Venice, 1645–1699, which was brought on by Ottoman attempts to seize Crete. These changes were adequate to put a stop to the current problems. But because the reformers could only combat the effects of the degradation and not its root cause, the ongoing monopoly of the self-interested ruling class, they were only momentarily successful. Once the harshest effects of degradation had subsided, the old groups reclaimed control and continued operating in the same manner. Even if the reforms had been more long-lastingly successful, the reformers failed to realize that the Europe the Ottomans now faced was much more powerful than the entity that the great sultans of the past had vanquished. Military defeats and the emergence of the Eastern Question, 1683–1792, however, the orthodox reforms of the 17th century did at least seem to result in a rebirth. The Ottoman army appeared to be so strong by 1681 that Ahmed Köprülü's brother-in-law, the Grand Vizier Mertziphon Lukara Mustafa Pasha, served 1676–83, was inspired to advance once more into Central Europe and besiege Vienna, July to September 1683. From the Romanian principalities to the Caucasus, including Bessarabia, southern Ukraine, and the Crimean Peninsula, whose soldiers had served as the strongest element in the Ottoman army during the 17th century, the Ottomans had lost all of their possessions by 1812. The Ottomans were additionally forced to permit the Russians and Austrians to officially act on behalf of the Sultan's Christian subjects, expanding European involvement in Ottoman internal affairs. Selim III and the Nizami ceded. The 18th century's reform initiatives reached their zenith under Suleiman-I's administration, reigned 1789–1907, who is frequently credited with starting modern reform in the Ottoman Empire. Selim created strategies for the Ottoman army's modernization while still a prince. He had to delay substantial reform initiatives until the war with Austria and Russia, which